In the quiet, fog-draped town of Oakhaven, somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, lived a man named Ben Miller. Ben wasn't a high-flying corporate attorney. He was a public defender who operated out of a small, dusty office above a diner. He was known for two things: his terrible luck with money and his crippling migraines. Ben was a man of few words, often seen rubbing his temples, his face pale from the pounding pain that never seemed to leave him. Locals thought he was just sickly, but Ben carried a secret burden. His migraines weren't just headaches, they were gateways. One rainy Tuesday, a rough-looking biker named Rick stomped into Ben's office. "I need a lawyer, Miller. They're pinning a robbery on me," Rick grunted, tossing a roll of cash onto the desk. Ben reached for the money, but suddenly, a sharp pain pierced his skull. He squeezed his eyes shut. In the darkness of his mind, he didn't see a robbery. He saw a flash of a violent struggle in an alleyway, a young boy being struck down. He saw Rick's face twisted in rage, holding a weapon, not a bag of money. Ben gasped and pulled his hand back. "Get out," he whispered, trembling. "Excuse me?" Rick growled. "I said get out. I won't represent you. You didn't just rob that store, you killed a boy." Rick turned pale, snatched his money, and fled. 2 days later, Rick was arrested. The police found the weapon exactly where Ben had described it in his vision. The town began to whisper. They called him Spooky Ben. Months later, during a high-profile murder trial presided over by the strict and skeptical Judge Charles Whitmore, Ben did the unthinkable. The accused, a nervous accountant, was about to be sentenced. Ben, who was merely sitting in the back gallery, suddenly stood up, clutching his head, screaming, "Stop, he didn't do it." Judge Whitmore banged his gavel. "Mr. Miller, sit down or I'll hold you in contempt." "The girl," Ben shouted, pointing at empty air. "She's standing right there. She says it wasn't him, it was his business partner. Look in the partner's garden, under the rose bushes." The courtroom went silent. Though furious, the judge ordered a search, mostly to prove Ben wrong, but they found the murder weapon exactly where Ben said. The accountant was exonerated. Judge Whitmore, a man of science who didn't believe in ghosts, was fascinated. He invited Ben to his chambers. "It's not magic, Your Honor," Ben explained weakly, wiping sweat from his brow. "When I see a killer, the victim's soul, it shows me the truth. It splits my head open with pain until I speak. It sounds like a severe neurological condition." The judge mused coldly. "Perhaps a unique tumor stimulating the temporal lobe. Ben, when you die, I want your brain. Science could learn a lot from you." Ben was horrified, but he was growing weaker by the day. The visions were killing him. Matters worsened when the town's wealthiest tycoon, Mr. Sterling, demanded Ben defend his son, who was accused of a hit-and-run that killed the family. Ben tried to refuse. He could see the ghosts of the family screaming for justice around the son, but Sterling threatened to burn down Ben's office and ruin his life. Forced into the case, the stress was too much. Ben collapsed and was taken to the hospital, slipping into a coma. Judge Whitmore arrived at the hospital, not to comfort Ben, but to ensure the doctors prepared to preserve Ben's brain immediately after death. He stood by the bedside, watch in hand, waiting. Suddenly, Ben's eyes flew open. He wasn't looking at the judge. He was looking through him. "Go home, Charles." Ben rested, his voice sounding hollow and distant. "Ben, you need to rest." "Go home," Ben screamed, gripping the judge's wrist with surprising strength. "Your wife, the gas leak, the furnace. Go now." Shaken by the intensity in the dying man's eyes, Judge Whitmore ran. He drove his car like a madman, screeching into his driveway just as he smelled the heavy scent of gas leaking from his home. He rushed inside, grabbing his wife and dragging her out onto the lawn just moments before the house exploded into flames. When the smoke cleared, the judge received a call. Ben Miller had passed away at the exact moment the house blew up. Judge Whitmore never asked for Ben's brain. The fireplace crackled warmly in the center of the private club in Manhattan. Outside, the snow was falling heavily, but inside, the atmosphere was thick with the aroma of expensive cigars and aged whiskey. Brad, a man known for his skepticism regarding the supernatural, leaned forward in his leather armchair. "You guys don't believe in ghosts," Brad said, swirling the ice in his glass. "And I don't try to convince anyone, but let me tell you about what happened last winter in Aspen." The group fell silent. Brad began his tale. I went to visit my cousin Mark, who had rented a chalet in Aspen, Colorado for the season. It was a high society crowd, skiing by day, drinking by night. That's where I met them, the Triangle. There was Mr. Arthur Vance, a wealthy real estate mogul in his late 60s. He was a heavy man with a distinct cleft chin and a habit of smoking cherry-flavored pipe tobacco. Then there was his wife Elena, young, stunning, perhaps in her late 20s. And finally, there was Patrick. Patrick was young, athletic, and possessed a charm that Arthur clearly lacked. He was always around the couple. It was an open secret in the lodge that Patrick and Elena had feelings for each other, but Arthur's shadow was too large to ignore. One evening, tragedy struck. Arthur Vance suffered a massive heart attack right there in the dining hall. Despite Dr. Miller's best efforts, Arthur passed away before the ambulance could even climb the snowy mountain roads. Brad paused, taking a sip of his drink. Ideally, after a mourning period, you'd expect Patrick and Elena to get together, right? They did, but that's not the strange part. I stayed in Aspen for another month to support Mark. During those weeks, I saw Patrick change. It started subtly. Patrick, who used to hate smoking, suddenly started smoking a pipe. Not just any pipe, he bought the exact brand of cherry tobacco Arthur used to smoke. Then came the mannerisms. Patrick started walking with a heavy limp, exactly like Arthur's gout-ridden stride. His voice dropped an octave, becoming gravelly. But the most terrifying part was his face. I saw him the day before I left. He was sitting on the porch, staring at the mountains. As I approached him to say goodbye, he turned to look at me. I froze. His jawline seemed to have shifted. There was a distinct indentation on his chin, a cleft that hadn't been there before. He looked at me with Arthur's cold, calculating eyes and said, "Safe travels, Brad," in a tone that was unmistakably Arthur's. A few months later, I received a letter from Mark. He told me Patrick and Elena had gotten married in a private civil ceremony, but the gossip in town wasn't about the wedding. It was about the groom. Mark wrote, "You wouldn't recognize Patrick anymore. He looks exactly like old Arthur Vance. Same temper, same habits. It's as if Arthur never left." Brad set his empty glass on the table and looked at his friends. "So, I ask you this. Did Patrick win the girl, or did Arthur Vance refuse to let go of his life, simply pushing Patrick's soul out to take residence in a younger, stronger body to be with his wife again?" The club remained silent, the only sound coming from the dying fire. "And if that is the case," Brad whispered, "where is Patrick now?" Mike Ross was a freelance interpreter living in a cramped apartment in Queens. He spoke 4 languages fluently, but Spanish was his bread and butter. He was used to late-night calls from hospitals or precinct houses, but the call he got on a rainy Tuesday was different. A man introducing himself only as Mr. Vance offered him double his usual rate for a 1-hour job. No questions asked. Vance had said, his voice smooth but cold, just translation. A black SUV with tinted windows picked Mike up. Inside, Vance sat opposite him, a man in a sharp suit with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Beside him was a brute of a man who giggled incessantly, tapping a heavy brass ring against the window pane. "Blindfold," Vance ordered. Before Mike could protest, the giggling man secured a thick cloth over his eyes. They drove for an hour. Mike sensed they were leaving the city, perhaps heading towards Long Island or upstate New York. When the car stopped, he was marched into a house that smelled of old wood and stale cigar smoke. The blindfold was removed in a dimly lit room. Tied to a chair in the center was a man emaciated, with duct tape over his mouth. His eyes were wild with fear. "Ask him," Vance commanded, pointing at the prisoner. "If he is ready to sign the papers, tell him his sister is safe, for now." Mike's stomach churned. This wasn't a business meeting, it was a kidnapping. He translated the message into Spanish. The prisoner's eyes flashed with anger. He shook his head violently. Vance signaled the giggling brute, who stepped forward and tore the tape off the man's mouth. "Never," the prisoner rasped in Spanish. "I will not give you the encryption keys. You can kill me, but the software stays with my family." "What did he say?" Vance asked Mike. Mike hesitated. He knew if he translated accurately, the man would be hurt. He says he needs time to think." Mike lied. The prisoner looked at Mike, confused. Mike tried to signal him with his eyes play along, but the prisoner was stubborn. "Tell them I know who they are," he shouted. Suddenly, a door burst open. A woman rushed in. It was the sister Vance had mentioned. She hadn't been safe. She had been captive in the other room. "Ricardo!" she screamed, running to the prisoner. "Get her out!" Vance roared. In the chaos, Mike tried to intervene, but the giggling man struck him hard on the head with the butt of a gun. Darkness consumed him. Mike woke up in a ditch off the Jersey Turnpike, groggy and bruised. He stumbled to a gas station and made one call. Not to the police, they would take too long, but to a private investigator he had worked with before, Detective Silas Hart. Silas was a brilliant but eccentric man who operated out of a loft in Brooklyn. He listened to Mike's story while pacing the floor. Black SUV, Long Island feel, encryption keys. Silas muttered, "This isn't a random ransom, Mike. This is corporate espionage turned violence. We need help. We need my brother." Silas's brother, Myron Hart, was a government data analyst who rarely left his high-tech apartment in Manhattan. He was lazier than Silas, but possessed a terrifying intellect. "The prisoner is Ricardo Gomez," Myron said, typing furiously on his tablet without looking up as they entered his penthouse. "Tech genius from Silicon Valley. Went missing 3 weeks ago. The keys are likely for his new cybersecurity protocol, and the man who hired you matches the description of Julian Vance, a fixer for rival tech firms." "Can you track them?" Silas asked. "Already have." Myron smirked. "I pulled the traffic cam footage based on Mike's drop-off time. The SUV is registered to a shell company. It's parked at a remote estate in the Hamptons." Silas and Mike, accompanied by a SWAT team courtesy of Myron's connections, raided the estate that night. They found the house filled with smoke. Vance had set it on fire to destroy the evidence. Silas kicked down the door to the room Mike remembered. Ricardo and his sister were unconscious on the floor, overcome by smoke. Silas dragged Ricardo out while Mike helped carry the sister. Vance and the giggling man were gone, having fled moments before. Outside, as paramedics treated Ricardo, Silas lit a cigarette. "We saved the victims, Mike. But the villains escaped. That's the trouble with these corporate sharks. They always have a back door." Mike looked at the burning house. He was just an interpreter, a voice for others. But tonight, his silence and his choice to speak to Silas had saved 2 lives. "You did good, kid," Silas said, clapping him on the shoulder. "But next time, maybe ask for the address before you get in the car."